Welcome to our Go Broker Retailer Wholesale Committee video series. My name is Major Singleton. I'm a mortgage broker with Edge Home Finance, and I'm excited to have three other people online with me today to have a conversation about do you really know VA loans? So I have Rylan Maddox, Rami Jamil, and our special guest for this conversation, Chris Griffith from Vetted VA. Gentlemen, thanks for being on. I'll let you introduce yourselves. Let's start with Rylan Maddox.
Good morning, gentlemen. My name is Rylan Maddox. I got into the mortgage industry in 2012. An ex-Navy veteran actually was my roommate, and he had recently joined a local mortgage company and just kept coming home and telling me. I was working for Budweiser at the time, wasn't really doing much with my life, and he started bringing me to events on Hickam and getting me involved with different veteran organizations and getting into veteran lending. And after about 6 months, I drank the Kool-Aid and I signed up, and that was with a retail bank. I was with retail for a little over a decade and just recently made the switch to go broker a year ago, mainly due to options and having more flexibility. And yeah, so here I am. I founded High Five Team, and we are based out of Colorado Springs now.
Perfect. Thanks, Rylan. Rami, you're up next. Thanks for being on with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It means a lot. My name's Rami Jamil. I've been doing this for about the same time Rylan has, about 10, 11 years. And I spent half of my career in the retail side and almost about half on this independent side. One of the privileges I got to have in the beginning of my career was working with a lot of veterans. It was a privilege because at some of these bigger shops, they work a lot of government loans. So I had the privilege, but I also made a lot of mistakes. I learned a lot, and it's helped out a ton. And being on this side couldn't be any better. So I'm excited to talk with you guys. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Rami. And our special guest, Chris, well known in our industry for your great work. Thanks for being online with us today. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, and also can you work in a little bit about what you guys are doing at Vetted VA?
Sure. Background on me, Podunk town, redneck nobody out here, North Texas. I'm a Texan and I'm a Marine. So, all the stereotypes probably imply there. Got out of the Marine Corps. I was medically retired for nothing cool, well before I really wanted to be done. In 2011, the very end of 2011, transitioned into mortgages with my stepfather and my mom's mortgage brokerage that had been around for around 25 years or so. Real estate company, mortgage brokerage, that whole kind of one stop. We transitioned from a broker to a non-delegated correspondent and then full delegated. And David got his full eagle, which he'd been trying to get for years. So I transitioned that space with them, went through the process with them. And after about 2 years of being a delegated lender, decided that I wasn't happy with what I could ultimately do serving the people that I served with in the military. So I transitioned over to a brokerage that I created, which I now have partners with. We've gone through a couple different name changes, or one actually only, for a rebrand. But everything that I've done has been built around identifying directly with the consumer, understanding their needs and motivations, pursuing a certain goal, and understanding my role in the process as a good steward, as a guide, delivering the information that they need to make choices on their own internal choices, right? Not to be the person pushing them one way or the next, but simply providing information and garnering their trust through the process. Through that process, I've also been the founder of Vetted VA, which is a pretty large organization now. I have a partner over there, also Nathan. He can't be around here today. But we are, I'm going to be blunt. There is nobody else in housing in America today that challenges professionals as hard as we do to learn the merits of what it takes to serve veterans in housing. There's no course curriculum that's more robust, more challenging. There's nothing out there going to push you as far. And through that process, I've learned a lot more about the deficiencies that professionals have, not only in product application and knowledge, but in applying the information or delivering the information to consumers at the same time. So my experience is somewhat robust. I have a few other businesses as well. I'm a bit of a serial entrepreneur at this point, but I love what I do in housing because for me, one house changed everything. One short sale I was able to buy with my VA loan changed my entire family's financial trajectory, right? The Heath Ledger kind of way, it changed our stars. And I do believe that, honestly, I believe what we do as professionals in housing is a life or death industry. I've seen the hopes and dreams die in consumers' eyes when they can't do a thing that they want to do. And that's death to me. That I've seen it happen. I think a lot of professionals have, and that's why I take what we do incredibly seriously. Thank you all for having me today.
Thank you for being
Great,
here.
and thanks for being with us, Chris. Phenomenal work you guys are doing, and we're going to dive into that a little bit more here. My name is Major. If anybody thinks that's a holdover from my military days, it is not. That is actually my birth-given name. I did 23 years in the Navy before I retired. The Navy decided I got to a point where they were going to send me to the Pentagon, and I really figured out that I would not fit well in that environment, so I retired, and I got into lending. Worked for a retail organization where I did a lot of VA loans, did well doing VA loans, and then crossed over to the broker side, where I wanted to give people more options, in some cases, some better pricing on their mortgages, and serve clients better. So that's how I'm here. So, gentlemen, we're going to dive into this, and I want to start with you, Rylan. Let's talk about the education and sales side of the VA loan. Okay, so I know you were a branch manager on the retail side. Can you talk about how most veterans and most active duty are introduced to the VA loan, and how sometimes muddy the line is between education and sales when it comes to serving our veterans?
Yeah, absolutely. So the organization I was with was really big on that introduction to veterans, which was a great piece of what they did. We partnered with MWR and AUSA. We were on post for the Army, Navy, and Air Force newcomers. And we were in their faces educating them about the VA home loan benefit. Great mission. We had seminars, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, as long as we needed. We had branded and unbranded so that we could get on post and get in front of units. And it was a really awesome setup because a lot of veterans do not know either that they have the benefit or how powerful the benefit actually can be when it comes to owning and purchasing a home. I like to tell a lot of the guys I work with in the Hawaii market, back when houses were $500,000, I would tell them a conventional loan without mortgage insurance, you need 20% down. That's $100,000 in cash. And I would be talking to an E4 and an E5, and I'd be like, $100,000 in cash. Think about that. You get the same opportunity to buy a house without mortgage insurance with a lower interest rate than a conventional loan typically. And you don't need $100,000 in cash to do it. Why are you living on post? Like, have you even seen what your buying power is? And that's normally how I'd get those conversations started, really showing people the impact of what that benefit could do. As Chris said, it's life-changing for a lot of people, or it can be life-changing. And so that sales aspect, though, came in. The education piece is awesome, and we did a lot of great things with that. But educating can be very expensive. We would spend probably upwards of, I would say, $30,000 to $40,000 a month just on marketing, on radio spend, TV spend, on newspaper spend, advertising that seminar. And if you have a seminar and you get 2 people in the room and you paid a few grand to do that, right? Over time, those costs add up. And over time, in order to fill those seats, we had to spend more and more money. And at a certain point, that educational piece got overlapped by the need to pay for it. And it kind of, I'm sure we'll talk about it today, but I was new in the industry. I was branch manager after being only a loan officer for 3 years. So I was kind of thrust into the fire and told to swim with a brick over my head sort of thing. And I didn't know what I didn't know. But after a certain amount of time, that educational piece started getting overwhelmed with, we need more loans, we need more loans, we need more loans. And instead of focusing on education, it was focusing on closing. And that was about the time that I made my split, and I actually resigned from that company in 2017 because the mission got clouded with the sales aspect and the need to profit. And I still look back and I still every now and then tell that old broker or that old owner, you should just become a 501(c) and educate. And I think he'd be a lot happier, but teach their own.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I want to transition to you, Rami, of knowing, just type of what goes into a business. And this is important for us to outline because many of people who listening to this podcast are retail originators, okay? And we're not here to bash retail or anything like that. There are some retail originators who run pretty tight margins and really serve the veterans well. But some originators have very high margins into their business. So from the operational side, and I say this as data has been released about the fourth quarter, that the loss per loan for IBM, independent mortgage banks or IMBs, was $2,812 per loan. So if somebody's looking at that from an operational standpoint, and we're looking at, what companies make on VA loans or how the basis points work and everything. You talk about how we anticipate that's going to impact the pricing. That's going to impact the pricing on all loans. But specifically, and we'll talk about servicing veterans who have defended this country, how do you see that impacting, the cost of origination or the interest rates and fees with veterans right now?
It's a great question, and it's a huge concern. It's one of those things that is crazy to see that the costs go up, especially on those loans for our veterans. Rylan, I don't want to make it, a bad thing because Rylan mentioned a lot of really good benefits on VA loans. They are much more advantageous, and they do they're more tolerant to lower credit score, and they do a lot of great things. But the cost to originate, a lot of that is impacting independence from being able to make it happen for people, right? And then it takes us out of the mix oftentimes. And there are retail lenders that run a thin margin and do a great job. But having worked at one, which was the largest VA lender, and we had really good pricing oftentimes. The biggest thing that you realize as you work your way up is that it's not for the best interest of the veteran, and I'll explain why. They want the market share. These big lenders and working at like I don't want to mention any names, but they'll sell servicing books back and forth for streamlines. They'll take losses because they can. They have lobbyists out there that created this 1% rule for brokers, where we would be able to charge 1%, which oftentimes we'll make 1% or less, but it makes the loan difficult to originate for the borrower. And it's this wolf in sheep's clothing that says, hey, we want to protect the borrower, here's what we're going to do with cost. And on the other side, they can charge it and call it something else. And us, we've got this ugly looking document, and sometimes we can't even charge it, and the loan won't even make sense to do. And the worst part of it, here's why I love being on this side. I mentioned when I introduced myself that I made some mistakes in the beginning, and that's really not cool. Think about this, picture this, and I hate talking about it, but I need to. 21-year-old kid working at a big retail shop, veteran, retiring, helping him out to purchasing a home in a different state, income no longer following through with him. He's actually retiring from the VA. I had not known that the income would change. Hadn't really understood what a pay stub looked like. The pay stubs look different. And, just that experience for that veteran, we figured things out. We fixed it. But on our side, that stuff doesn't happen, guys. We know we really want to make sure our clients, not only our veterans and all our clients, get the best deal, but they have the best experience. And there's so many moving pieces on a VA loan that the cost to originate itself, we keep it low on our side because we do a lot of things in house, and we utilize a lot of services out there, such as UWM and different partners, and we collaborate with one another, and it takes a village. But the cost, there has to be something done about it, especially when it comes to us independents that are working boots on the ground with our local communities.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up because the company that you were at very much had a call center structure, and business is business. People create these things, for whatever need they have. But the challenge in that is, like back to what Chris is doing with Better VA. There's no challenge of the professionals, and all of us have had loans on this side where we get a phone call and somebody is saying, "Hey, this loan officer said this, and is this true?" All of us have had that. If we know the 26-7, we know what that document says, and we know just because our experience of doing loans, if you're calling a call center loan officer, somebody who does not understand the VA loan, the VA entitlement, the military member, you could really end up in a situation where you're damaging a veteran and damaging that family. So that becomes a real challenging part when there are these companies out there who put a lot of money into marketing. And if you Google, VA loans, they're one of the first companies that pop up. And people actually believe that this company is the one you go through if you want a VA loan. And they put a lot of money in marketing into that. Now, all of us have seen that particular company who I'm talking about, their loan estimate, and we know their fees and their interest rates are ridiculous when you compare it to what you can get at a broker. But they put a lot of money into marketing. And what people don't understand, and I want to bring you in, Chris, to talk about this more. What people don't understand often about the VA loan is that, frankly, all companies have some sort of overlays in some way or another. Okay. Mm-hmm. The general good part about a broker is we have access to so many companies. We know which company fits the veteran. So talk about overlays, and I bring this up in a lot of and when I'm teaching veterans. I mean, you can go to one company and they said, "Hey, your credit score is at 638. The minimum credit score is 640. We need you to go away and fix your credit, and then come back in 3 months." The problem is that transitioning service member has a wife or a husband and kids, people they got to get into school. They got to start a mission. And then they start with a mission. They don't buy a house because they think their credit score doesn't qualify. So a lot of why we're on this side is because, the option to work with different companies. But tell some stories that you've seen about this factor about overlays and just the advantage of knowing what the 26-7 actually says.
Awesome. Appreciate the question, certainly. Overlays are frustrating, but they exist everywhere. First of all, they exist for brokers. They exist for retail alike. In the beginning, I maybe did. And if some of y'all know me from back in the day, you already know this. I have my own personal biases that exist given my own experience, but I can also set those aside and look to encounter my well-held beliefs daily to try and reprove them to ensure that nothing's changed. Where it pertains to overlays, and the greatest problem that I see with them is when your overlay or the overlays that you as a professional have to encounter are relayed to the veteran consumer, the active military consumer, in a manner that manipulates their understanding of what their entitlement that they've earned can do. Don't let your limitations define someone else's opportunities. That's what an overlay does, right? We had our own bank. I was a part of it. It was a family company. I'm the only one of the family that does mortgages, right? I left that because what I realized was, even though we could do what we want, guess what? Warehouse lines determine what you want to do, what you can do. It's not just because you're a retail lender now you can do everything. That's not how it works at all. Overlays exist everywhere, and they artificially reduce the earned entitlement that the veteran has achieved through fulfilling an obligation, right? Debt. It's debt. A term of enlistment's debt. And they go through that and they fulfill it, and they've earned a thing. It's the only mortgage that you earn. And we won't go into all of the things you have to do to earn it, right? But understand it's well earned. And so when you reduce in the veteran's mind, when you manipulate their mindset around what they can do based on what you can do and gain from it, you really need to check yourself. And you need to consider why you're in the industry. Are you in the industry to serve people, or are you in the industry to serve yourself? And if you're in the industry to serve yourself, that's okay. Admit to it. But be honest with yourself. Don't lie to yourself about it, because at the end of the day, the overlays that you submit your consumers to, at the very least, you should tell them, just like I do now to this day, hey, look, I can't do this. I'm not here, or the companies I'm set up with don't have this. I know a person. Show them the way. Show them how to solve the problem that's in front of them, the obstacle in front of them that's between them and the biggest opportunity that they've had yet, right? Maybe one of the biggest opportunities that they'll have in their life. Because if you can't do that, here's the truth. You're going to wash out of this industry. And you're probably going to wash out over the next 12 months while it's still pretty tight, right? But if you can get to the point to where you see yourself as a servant, showing people how to solve the problems that are standing between them and their biggest opportunities, that's where you're going to find success. And if you get there, you're really going to need to understand overlays, and you're going to need to understand the root source. At VetaVA, we challenge people. We put them through a handbook test, a Ginnie Mae test. We make professionals spend more time in the handbook and Ginnie Mae selling guide than they ever have in their careers, period. Rylan, am I lying?
No, not at all.
Not at all.
And I read the handbook front to back before I ever met Chris, and yeah, I've learned a lot since joining VetaVA.
And here's why. As a training institution, our job is to create failure. The only way to create failure is to get repetition after repetition after repetition with slightly modifying those repetitions. What are you doing? We teach professionals how to go to the source, locate the information, extract it, apply it, validate it, and backstop it, and even peer remediate it in a multitude of ways so that what they know is not the problem. They don't have to know anything. They have to know a process that they commit to muscle memory for, and they have to be technically and tactically proficient at doing so they can get to information that is unknown very quickly. Major, Rylan, Rami, y'all been doing this for a long time. All of us have been doing it for at least a decade at this point. Do you or do you not still run into things with VA loans where you go, I don't know?
All the time.
Ladies and gentlemen, what you do when you do not know is more important than what you know. You need to have a process. As a Marine, learning my basic weapon, every Marine's a rifleman. What that means is our grunts, our bakers, our candlestick makers can all shoot you in the face very proficiently, just point blank. That's what it means. And to do so in boot camp as a Marine, I spend time intimately getting to know my only weapon, my basic weapon, my rifle. I take it apart, I clean it, I put it back together again, I weapons function safety test it. And over time, hundreds of hours, my hands learn a muscle memory to understand this tool, right? To understand how it functions, how it moves, where breakdowns occur, how to troubleshoot those breakdowns, whether it's a long-term one or an immediate action drill, right? And it's through that process that you become great at what you do, right? It's not what you know, it's what you know how to do when you don't know that's going to determine where you go, right? And so whether you're organizing with a group like us at VetaVA to train regular, we train a lot. It's basically a big working party. Cat's out of the bag, right? Whether you do it with us or somewhere else, whether you take the handbook to a closet in your room and you just read through it over and over and over, spend time in the sources. They will define for you what can and cannot be done. But understand that there's a difference in theory and reality. And though the handbook and the Ginnie Mae selling guide are, I would say, the two biggest root sources of what you can and cannot do for veterans, there are all sorts of other modifiers to those sources. You have state overlays, you have circular overlays, you have all different lender overlays, right? You have different things that come in and modify the root, and you need to understand where those modifications happens, where the roots exist, so that you can get to the bottom of the information that's needed and give it to the consumer who's searching for it. Ladies and gentlemen, a sale is very simple. My last job in the Marine Corps was a counterintelligence, human intelligence professional. What that means is fancy, whatever. Source operations, interrogations, right? My job is to know how to approach someone needing something, them needing something, and build a relationship and get them to choose what's best for them, right? In a very harsh way for the Marine Corps. But the heart and soul of a sale is very simple. Commit this to memory. When you exchange the value you have for the trust that they have in your value, the sale is over. It doesn't matter if a transaction occurs. You want to skyline yourself. You want people to understand that you're there to help them. And you want to have a process that actually does while still allowing them the freedom to choose. Because at best, your consumer may tell you 70% of the reason why they're doing something. The other 30%, frankly, it's none of your business. It's their right. It's their need to understand. So show them the tools, show them the sources that dictate what they can and can't do, and let them choose. And then they'll trust you. And then you don't have to worry about selling.
Thanks, Chris. So I appreciate, I've come to appreciate as a professional, I've come to appreciate so much of, vetted VA. Last 2 years, I probably originated somewhere around 250 to 300 VA loans. And it was, when I looked at the vetted VA curriculum and the things that's laid out, and I'm like, having done this 300 times for service members, I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, this is a lot. But as a professional, I always also recognize the need to be challenged in that way. Because when I was at the retail shop, there were things when I came to the broker side, there were things that we can do to help veterans, that I assumed were things you couldn't do with a VA loan just because those were the rules at my company. And those were, outlined. And then I'd be shocked when I tell somebody, hey, no, you can't do this. And we were quote unquote the VA lender. We had a pretty large market share. And we were in the state of Hawaii before I relocated to Texas, and we did a lot of volume for VA loans, but there were some things that you really didn't know, and that's why I'm glad we titled this "Do you really know VA loans?" Because even as brokers and as professionals, I think there's a need for organizations like Vetted VA to challenge us in order to know more about just how this benefit operates. So I want to ask, Rylan. Rylan's been a member of Vetted VA for quite some time. I want to ask Rylan, like, how do you feel more empowered to serve veterans, not being a veteran and not knowing the veteran life per se, outside of through the eyes of the people you serve? How do you feel more empowered to serve veterans by working with professional organizations and being trained by professional organizations like Vetted VA?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess a little bit of background. I didn't fully introduce myself. My father was Air Force, grandfather's Navy, and my brother's currently Army. So I'm surrounded by military family, but correct, I myself never served. I've got a pity story about how I almost did once upon a time, whatever, no one cares. But I got into this industry, as I said, because my roommate was in the Navy, and I was thrust into the company I worked for was, we'll just say, veterans in their name. Their entire driving force was around VA loans. I'm not even joking. At one point in time, a couple years into my career, I called up one of the head underwriters. I had my very first conventional loan, and I started rattling off this semi-complicated situation to them, and they just stopped me and said, based on what you've told me, you know more about conventional right now than I do. This was an underwriter, and I was a young loan officer. Underwriters were like, I don't know if this is proper, but like gods. Like, you didn't question them back in my young days. And that scared me to death. I didn't realize why an underwriter was telling me I knew more about a loan product than they did. But the company really was like focused on VA. And I come to find out years later that the reason for that is because the margins on VA and FHA on what we call Govy loans are some of the highest in the industry, meaning that the Govy loan products make companies more money per loan. We were talking about cost and everything, right? So it makes more sense for them to do more. And to touch on what Chris just said, the educational piece, all of that, that's great stuff. But when the mission stops becoming about helping the individual veteran and the mission becomes, like you said, market share or profits, that's when you start to get away from what's important. And instead of how can we help the veteran the best, or is this in the best interest of the veteran, which is what the outward message is being portrayed through that marketing, it becomes, how do we stay profitable? How do we, in 2016, the company I worked for overtook the largest VA lender. We did more per volume in 2016. We overtook the number one. And I remember it was such a celebration. But in order to get to that point, and what I realized far too late in my career was, it takes a lot of money to get there. And so Hawaii, we had 24.3% purchase market share for VA loans in the state of Hawaii. 1 out of every 4 VA purchases in the entire state went through my office. How does that help a veteran? How does a veteran benefit from me having 24% market share? That's great for me. It's great for my company. It's great for my owners. It's great for all my non-producing managers that are making dollars on every deal we close. But how's it better for the veteran? It could be good for a veteran if they had more exposure, if we had more exposure to get and reach more people, right? But at a certain point, it becomes, what's it called? Diminishing returns. At a certain point, reaching more veterans, but at the cost to them, is defeating the original mission that you set out to do, which was to help every veteran that has the opportunity to own a home do so, right? And so for me, it was doing great things, but pushing that cost off to the people you're trying to help. We used to have a motto that we were going to protect the veteran, protect the veteran. And somewhere along the way, I started realizing our job was to protect the veterans' wallets. Our job was to protect the veteran, as Chris said, opportunities. And that one particular company I worked for, because everything Chris just said about the training, right? All of the repetition and all of the training and everything else. If a company has to do that on their books, what's naturally going to happen? You're going to shift to quantity, not quality. And that's what we saw. We saw loan officers not getting the proper training, not understanding the product they were selling. And instead, the giant posters all over the wall in headquarters and XYZ were, how many pre-quals can you get back? How many people can you get to return their application or their documents? Or how many deals can we get from point A to point B and point B to point C? Not how many veterans did we help close loans, or how many veterans were denied somewhere else that we were able to close. It was just about quantity. It was about the metrics of keeping the company profitable. And that particular company, and Chris and I think have spoken about this through Vetted VA as well, is they had a minimum credit score. And as Chris said, instead of saying this is all we can do, they tell veterans this is all you can do. And then they created a program rather than give those veterans the education to go do what they want to do, to buy that house right then and there. They created a program for credit repair, which is a great, it feels good to say that, but what you're effectively doing is telling people, we can't help you right now, so we're going to put you in a program so that we can help you later, instead of showing you where you can go get help right now. Because again, that's the company's mission. And what I like about the independent side, like what I like about the wholesale channel, is myself, it's my company, it's my team, it's my clients. So if I can't help them, I have someone I know that can, hopefully, or I can give them direction to go. And that's the part that's most important to me after making that change and what I call growing up or evolving or whatever you want to call it. There was once upon a time where I thought I was on the right mission, but when I looked at the numbers, the data, the behind the scenes, I remember the first time I ever saw what's called a goodbye letter. It's the form that goes into a file when a lender sells that servicing to whoever's going to hold that loan. And I saw the dollar line on the bottom as that branch manager of how much money the company made on that deal. And I knew how much my office kept, and I knew how much we paid our loan officers. So everything else was going to corporate. And it was disgusting because in some form or fashion, that veteran paid for that. Maybe not up front, maybe not at the closing table, but in his payments every single month for as long as he owned that house, he paid that profit. And it was, yeah.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to hit on that real quick. Just to be clear, I'm a capitalist. I'm an unabashed capitalist. Capitalism is the only thing that have brought people from here to here consistently, anywhere and everywhere it's ever been tried. I'm a fan of capitalism. So when we start talking about cost and one non-competitive model versus another's, understand that as Vetted VA is an organization, Rylan knows this, but we consume data more probably than just about any other private training company out there. And we use that data to help our professionals hold themselves accountable, right? See what's going on with themselves compared to their peers in our community, compared to the entire nation of people in the community. And we do so because we hope that they're the right type of people, that when they see how they are not as competitive as they could be, that they would choose to be more competitive for the sake of the veteran. We look at everything from the veteran, the military member's perspective on the product they're receiving, on how competitive it is. And so just know, as a professional, you know how to check and see if you're competitive or not. And if you're not competitive, don't peddle stuff that's not competitive. Compete where you ought to compete, win where you ought to win, and don't take bad W's onto your leaderboard that have to have an asterisk by it. Do you want to go to the grave with an asterisk by your name? Who does? Right? It's your life to live. You get to choose. But understand, when we're talking about profitability in one model versus the next, it's not a matter of good and bad. It's not. It's business. It doesn't work that way. It's simply this: from a consumer's perspective, there's competitiveness, and then there's lack of competitiveness. And competitiveness isn't just built in price, but it's built in product optionality as well. Not being able to do something for 6 months has a measurable cost tied to it, right? You can watch the market change. You can watch prices go up. You can watch interest rates go up. And so time being your most valuable commodity, whether you're a professional or consumer, you need to understand that 4 months, oh my gosh, that's a costly time period, right? You have to understand that so that you can seek to be competitive for the sake of your borrowers, because that's how you're going to win.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, Chris, because I want to wrap up with this question, and I want to kick off with Rami here. One of the benefits we have, as Chris talked about, being competitive and offering a competitive product. We have the ability to, and I will do this often. I will send my AE at PennyMac, and I was like, "Hey, Major, do you have any loans that I can help you with?" I'm like, "Hey, your VA's pricing is off by this much. Get better." And it's not personal. It's just, hey, this is where you are compared to where I'm seeing all of these other lenders. I might send a message to UWM, hey, you're a bit off with this scenario. If you want these loans, if you want me to send you these loans, get better here. So it's about being competitive. So as we wrap up, I want each one of us to basically say, hey, what's your messaging to originators, whether you're retail or wholesale? Originators regarding VA loans and how we serve veterans in this economy right now with the higher interest rate environment that we've seen over the last, 2 years or so. What's your messaging to originators that are out there, serving our veterans? I'll start with you, Rob.
Thank you. I like that question. And first off, I think it goes without saying, but sometimes we need to remind our people, it's a privilege to work with our veterans. I personally believe we live in the greatest country in the world. I love this place. I'm a first generation, and I was raised to always do the right thing. So it doesn't matter who you are, I want to do the right thing. And I felt, even at retail, when you mentioned Rylan, I still would guide clients to that good decision always. And on this side, Major, you mentioned the pricing. Absolutely. We are looking for better pricing for our clients because we want to be competitive, right, Chris, in business. And we are doing it with multiple lenders. We even have put our neck out there and signed up with some lenders that maybe we're not extremely comfortable with, but it's, no problem. We'll figure it out because they've got this 580 program for veterans that's refer eligible, right? And this veteran did a bankruptcy, 13 months ago. And you know what? The plain Jane folks won't do it, and we're going to figure it out. And if we can't, at the end of the day, I think it should always go without saying, if you can't serve the veteran, like, Chris, you said something great. If you're truly providing value, if you're doing everything you can, what does it matter if you don't do the deal? Like, send him over. I have a veteran right now. He's in process with me. And he left me a few months ago. They gave some astronomical number as to where we wouldn't even be able to do the loan. It wasn't, that's where we were. He came back to us. I'm doing his loan now. That house didn't work out. Why? Because I restored his entitlement, and that didn't happen. They didn't even do that, right? And he had entitlement used up, and he's doing a jumbo loan in South Carolina. Like, dude, how? The loan estimate showed $1,500 in title fees. Like, I educated him. I still had him go with his old lender, but he's a veteran, right? He served for our country, for us to live here. It's a privilege. And when you treat people like that, you look out for their best interest in pricing. You reach out to the AEs to make sure they can, make exceptions for you. You really find a solution and dig deep when you hit a roadblock. You're going to serve the veterans, in the best way possible, and they'll come back to you and they'll love you, and that should go for everybody.
Awesome stuff. Rylan?
I'll be super short, and to echo on what Chris said, I was in vetted VA in the professionals group as a retail loan officer for 4 years, Chris, 4 years.
Way too long.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I feel ashamed of that because of what I'm about to say is that vetted VA above all else is very much accountability, but it's not people pointing fingers at you. It's getting you to point the finger at yourself. And I was in vetted VA way too long with that right in front of me. And it was right towards the end that someone looked me in the face and said, "Do you do your own mortgages at your company?" And no. And if I'm not going to do my own mortgage at my company, how dare I do a veteran's mortgage with my company, right? But that's what I was like, that was the Kool-Aid I was drinking since I got into the industry. And so I'll leave with that. Look at yourself, hold yourself accountable, hold yourself to a higher standard. What would you do for yourself? If you're not willing to do that for your clients, or if you're not willing to do that to your clients, then you need to have a conversation. And that's all I'll say there.
Good stuff, man. Good stuff, Rylan. Chris, you get the wrap up here. You're messaging to originators right now.
All right. So here's the first thing I want you to hear. If you're a retail originator and you're listening to this, you're like, man, these retail bashing. VA has several different retail originators as a part of our active duty membership, and I love them. They're amazing people. They're capable of some things. Some of us brokers are not at times, and we're capable of things they're not in times. Neither of us are better. We are both mutually bound to a mission of assuring that our mutual activity prepares the way for a veteran to achieve the best, the most competitive, the most problem-solving tool that they can. And it's because of our joint affiliation that gives us such strength. We are not a retail beating organization. It takes both sides of an industry, I truly believe, to exist. Some retail lenders are much less competitive than others. No company, no two companies are built the same anywhere. So I don't want you to have emotional guards go up. And I should have said this in the beginning because now they're not going to make it to this part of the video. But I don't want you to get to the place where you're like, man, I'm not going to listen to anything these guys said. All they did was beat me and bash me. It's not about that at all. It's about you understanding the difference of you versus other options like you, and have a desire to see the consumer get the best of those, whatever they are. I don't mind getting beat. I don't mind getting beat by a company that in that moment is better than me. I needed to be beat. And out of that loss, I will seek to get better. At VA, we simply seek to show you the truth behind your activities from a consumer's perspective so you can see and choose and decide how you're going to be better tomorrow competing for the consumers you're claiming to be best for, right? That's what it's about. That's what the whole thing is about. So personally, I made the decision to go broker a long time ago because I believed that it provided me the most amount of flexibility and options. At the end of the day, I believe the person with the most options usually wins the day. But I can point to several people who can crush me in certain scenarios, right? Maybe I get them on a couple too, and I will always compete. But it's a friendly competition because our desire is the same: to ensure the consumer is protected, to ensure the consumer is receiving a competitive product, right? Ensuring the consumer has the right options in front of us. And no one person is ever best. There's no coldest beer in town. That's a false statement. You don't have the best rates ever. You don't have the most product. It's not about that at all. So whatever you do, please hear our message and simply understand that if you're in a place to where you know your product flexibility is lacking, where you know your pricing on government loans seems to be a lot different than your pricing on conventional loans, because big shops do this. They make more in profits from government-based loans, FHA, VA, USDA, VA specifically, and they use those profits to pad their larger market, which is conventional loans, right? So they can be more competitive in those places. So they're choosing to be more competitive for one type of consumer while specifically choosing to be less competitive for another. If you're in a place like that, you're in a place with very few products and programs, you're in a place with bad pricing, high cost, all of these things, simply step back, take yourself out of it, take all of us out of it, and say, what's best for the consumer? If I was the consumer choosing this, what would I choose? And then look at that, being honest with yourself, and plan a better way forward if you want to, right? Or at the very least, understand your deficiencies and seek to help the consumers that run into those deficiencies not be limited by your limitations. Our job in this industry is to be the best steward, the best servant to a consumer's need, regardless of result to us, regardless of how much time it takes us to put that effort and energy in. And if you can do that in a way that's honest and true, sure, you might lose this loan, but your actions, the things that you do to serve this person, even though that person knows you're not the one profiting, make an impact. And they'll do the right thing, and they'll refer you people like that may fit the product that you have. The goal isn't to capture everything. The goal is to compete for everything that you ought to and win where you should. Good wins. Wins that you can feel good about when you go to sleep at night. I appreciate everyone's effort. I appreciate y'all certainly time on this call. I've been in this whole one dialogue versus the next. For anyone that's followed along with me for a while, my personal biases have informed it. I've held those biases in check in the way that we've grown our organizations. And what I want to leave everyone with is simply this: you're all needed. Every one of you is needed. but you're needed to be the best that you can be. So what are you doing today? What are you going to do this afternoon? What are you doing tomorrow morning? What is on your calendar next week so that you get better? Because if you aren't structuring and spending and investing your time and getting better, I promise you, you will wash out one way or the other.
Wow, thanks, Chris. Hey, Rylan, thanks. Rami, thanks. Hey, thanks. This has been a great conversation. I'm sure we'll continue this conversation offline and everything. If you want to reach out to either one of us and have a deeper conversation about anything we've said or conversations, do so. We're all open books. I know all of these gentlemen professionally, more than great originators and great servants of the veteran community. They're great human beings. So they're willing to have a conversation with you. Thank you for joining us on another episode of our Go Broker video series. All episodes of AIME's Go Broker videos are available through your AIME member portal profile. And be on the lookout for another episode coming your way shortly. See you next time.
Thanks, gentlemen.